Let's talk impeachment, specifically some things that we should know as Americans and, what is being bandied about as possibilities. Number one is that the House would impeach. They're the ones who would impeach. Basically, they would find that there should be a trial, and they can do that with just Democratic votes. And then the Senate would require 67 votes to actually convict the president on basis of impeachment and also to remove him from office. Now, that's the constitutional side of it. Let's talk more about that and the political side of it and what we may have learned as America from what happened to Bill Clinton and also to Richard Nixon. Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, is the co-author of News Verdicts, the debates in presidential campaigns, among other things, and tweeting at Dr. B. Rosenberg. Bill, welcome back. Thanks for being here this morning.
Good morning.
So we could see this happen, as it did with Republicans and Bill Clinton, a vote in the House to move on impeachment, and they impeached President Clinton. There was a trial in the Senate, and Bill Clinton was acquitted. There was never an impeachment of Richard Nixon, correct?
That's correct. In other words, What happened was with Watergate, as most of your listeners realize, Nixon's Watergate scenario began with a break-in and a cover-up, then a Saturday night massacre where he kicked out all the people that were responsible for maybe causing him some tension. And at that point, in October of 1973, the balance switched between those Americans who wanted him removed from office versus those who wanted to keep him in the position. So there became kind of a critical point in history where the tides turned on Nixon in 1973, 1974, early 74. When you talked about Bill Clinton, the interesting thing was that the House of Representatives with Newt Gingrich and company were the ones that were pursuing Clinton in terms of impeachment. But one of the differences between the time for Clinton, Nixon, and now Trump is that Clinton retained a lot of public approval. So while the elected leaders of the Republican side wanted to get rid of him, the public really didn't, and as a result, he ended up staying in office because the Senate did not convict him.
Now, both the Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton happened in the second terms of office. Is there a difference? I'm not technically about how impeachment works, but politically, what does that do to this?
Well, there are some that would argue that if someone commits an impeachable act and it's almost the end of their term of office, you just let the public come in and vote them out. That's not an option that happens in a president in the second term because he cannot or she cannot run again. So the only way to remove them and really make the statement is to remove them from office. The problem with that theory, as I would hold, is that if something so egregious happens during the first term of office, you may not really have the luxury of saying, well, let's just wait until November of 2020 to remove the president. And that's playing out right now with what's going on with Turkey and Syria. That's playing out with a variety of different scenarios that have already happened and are going to probably happen again in the short term. So while it is a mechanism to remove the president through an election, particularly during the first term, sometimes it may not be the best course of action because things may have to be done a little bit sooner.
Dr. William Rosenberg is with us. Bill, I was looking at some numbers in the surveys, and you've included those in some of the papers you were forwarding to me. And one of the things I've seen is there's been a gradual increase in interest of bringing about impeachment against the president. That said, it mostly seems to be among Democrats and independents, not among Republicans. The support for the president still remains pretty strong. How does that factor into the decision that the Democrats will be making about whether or not there should be a vote on impeachment?
Well, I think Nancy Pelosi has been kind of clear about her move and sort of restrained action towards moving to impeachment, even hearings, that she wanted there to be more consensus across the aisle. And I think that included not just people in the Congress, but in the public as well. As you mentioned earlier, the Democrats have enough votes today to be able to file an impeachment charge or charges against him just with Democratic votes. However, in the Senate, they don't have enough votes on a straight party line to be able to convict. What we find is that the popular approval and support for the president in terms of staying in office and the job he's doing has been overwhelmingly positive for Republicans. And I think part of the calculus that's taking place right now is that these hearings and with the the dribbling out of information and press conferences and so forth that are revealing more and more information, particularly about the Ukrainian situation, are probably starting to put a bigger chink into the armor of Donald Trump, and is causing perhaps some Republican leaders who are going to become disaffected and be more concerned about the future of the Republican brand than rather the future of the Trump brand. And when that happens, it's going to give some space potentially to Republican voters to think, well, maybe we ought to rethink this. And if you take a look at the polls that have been happening over the past year or so, in June, for example, the vote for the public opinion polls of registered voters that thought that the president should be perhaps impeached was only at 31%. By the time we got to October, it's 58%, and that number probably will continue to rise among the general population. The question is what will happen with Republicans, and that's going to be kind of a measure of consensus in the public. But at the end of the day, in the election in 2020, even if the Republicans remain steadfast with Donald Trump, that's not enough for him to potentially win, because the Democrats and independents will probably be able to carry the day if they're more unified.
Bill, also on the impeachment, when it goes to the Senate, obviously the House with Democrats, they could get it there regardless of what the charge is, et cetera. But the Senate, it seems that there's also an awful lot of flexibility in terms of how this is conducted, right? In other words, there are people who come from the House and they will actually manage the trial in the Senate. That's the way it works. But beyond that, I mean, there could be a lot of different directions this goes. It seems like the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, has said that there is going to be a process if it comes to the Senate. And there's been some meetings on that. What can we expect, if anything? I mean, would this be a quick thing? Would this be fairly drawn out, or is it unclear at this point?
Well, my sense of this is that Mitch McConnell is a very crafty politician. He's very familiar with the rules, and he has intimated already a while ago that the trial may be really quick. We may just look at the evidence and decide he's not guilty and then just move on. So unless there's a serious examination of the charges and a full discussion of them, Mitch McConnell will in many ways be able to control the destiny of that vote. But what's also been happening is that Mitch McConnell and other Republicans have been sort of aghast at a few of the recent actions taken by President Trump, including Turkey and including the Mar-a-Lago G7 situation, where many of them have voted against or expressed displeasure with the president. So the vote in the Senate may not be as consistently strong as it had been in the past. The threat of being primaried by a Trump loyalist in their own elections when they're running for Senate, as we move further and further along, is probably going to hold less sway for some of the members of the Senate that are concerned about that. So as a result, I think that the play for Mitch McConnell is perhaps to try and move the whole process forward, but he has to be careful about how he times it. This discussion about having the House make their decision by Thanksgiving and the Senate making their decision by Christmas is probably very unrealistic. Excuse me. The Democrats probably want to draw it out a little bit longer to get closer to things like the Iowa caucus and so forth. But at the same time, they don't want to lose momentum. So as long as new revelations and new State Department people and new intelligence people and others come forward in these hearings and information continues to leak out, they're not going to be so much in a hurry to actually have the vote in the House. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a yin and yang between what the Democrats want and what the Republicans want, but I don't think it'll be as quick as Christmas for this all to be over.
All right. Bill Rosenberg, Dr. William Rosenberg. Bill, I hope you feel better soon. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, co-author of News Verdicts, The Debates in Presidential Campaigns, joining us to talk about the process and tweeting at DRB, as in Dr. B, as DRB Rosenberg, Rosenberg.